Hello, and welcome back to the fallen tree. I was planning on doing some milling today, showing you as we were cutting up this poplar log here, but unfortunately, yesterday, I had an issue. The pull start assembly on the motor, the pull string broke. When it broke, the spring also broke. So I need to order a new one of these. Should be here in a couple days. I'll show you how to change it at the end of this video. But today, since we're down at milling, we might as well take care of this machine. So we're gonna go over some basic, essential maintenance needs on it, one by one. We're gonna start off with changing the oil. It's been a little bit since I changed the oil, so let's get started. I'm going to assume most of you guys know how to change this oil, but for the few that don't, I'm going to go over some of the basics. First thing you're going to need is a 17 millimeter and a 13 millimeter wrench. 17 millimeter will go on the extension so you don't unscrew it, and then the 13 millimeter goes on the oil plug itself. Now there's a lot of questions I see on different forums about what oil to use. Well, Kohler did a pretty good job with this engine. They put that you need 10W30 on the dipstick. They also put it on the air filter telling you what oil you needed. And any other parts, doesn't matter if it's Briggs & Stratton, Kohler, Honda. If you look on the model number, which is going to be somewhere on a placard somewhere, you're going to be able to look up that model number and the part you need and find it easily online. Here, it tells you right here what my model number is. So while we're waiting for the oil to drain, let's check the air filter. Now this is a pretty important step, being that you need the air to mix with the fuel to create the combustion for your engine. So we want to make sure that everything's clean. In this case, I think this filter's about on its last leg. I could try to blow it off, but you know what? I found them online for like $6 a piece. I bought 2 of them. That way I have it for the next. Put on the summer mode, and we're ready to go. Now that the oil's stopped dripping, and this took about a half an hour. I mean, it drained slowly. I wasn't able to start it and run it a little bit beforehand to warm it up, so it was pretty cold. We'll tighten that back up and we'll add some oil. Now me, I like to use synthetic oil. Technology's come a long ways in the years, and I think the synthetic just holds on to the parts a little bit better. To each their own. I'm sure a conventional will be fine in this type of motor. But for the extra $1.50 it costs for this quart, it's money well spent in my opinion. This engine, when I looked it up, took 1.3 quarts of oil. Now that we got the basic engine parts taken care of, I'm going to start looking at the sawmill itself. So the first thing that I do is I put the tension on, open up the front, and I start looking at the key components, spin it, make sure everything sounds good, make sure there's no real wobbles in anything as I'm visually inspecting it and physically turning it to inspect it. In this case, I don't see anything wrong with it. Everything's looking good at this point. So I'm going to take off the tension and we're going to remove the blade and start looking at a few more things. Now for this step, I'll tell you, you should probably wear gloves. I didn't have any out there. It reminds me of that old phrase I used to hear all the time when I was a kid. Do as I say, not as I do. Well, the blades are sharp, and I've seen a lot of people cut themselves. Now that we got the blade off, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to turn them, visually inspect everything, make sure we don't hear anything funny, see anything funny. Every time you have it open, you should probably take a look at the belts. Belts are pretty important. So for this follower belt, you should have a 16th inch proud of your pulley. Now looking at my drive belt, I'm starting to see some cracks. I'm not seeing a lot of fraying on the edge. I see a little bit of fraying right there. I think this belt's getting to the end of its life. It's got well over 100 hours on it. I'm going to order those up and have it available when I need it. Next, we'll be heading to the blade guides. For this, I'm going to remove this whole thing, seeing that there's a lot of surface rust, and the guides themselves I haven't been able to get to move to adjust. So I'm going to have to start with taking off this little nipple that the lubricant comes out of. That way the assembly will slide past. This needed an 8mm wrench. Then there's a bolt on top of this assembly, which took a 13mm, I believe. And we loosen that off, and ideally it should slide right off. But as we all know on these projects, nothing's quite that simple. This side had some surface rust. So I'm going to gently tap it with a hammer, see if that loosens it up. Which I get a little bit of movement out of it, but something just seems to still be holding it up. So I'm going to take my wire brush, see if I can't clean it off and loosen it up a little bit more. Hopefully this does the trick. Something I was going to have to do anyways. But it looks like something's still holding it up here. So let's get a closer look. Okay, it's the blade guide itself is sticking up a little bit. See that little notch? That's the bottom in between. So that's one of the things that's all corroded. So we're going to try to knock that down a little bit. First I undid the Allen screws. There's 2 of them on each side of each blade guide. One in the front and one in the side. So I'll spray a little WD-40 now. I got that knocked down and this slid off finally. The other side comes off identically, except it's way less of a pain. So behind your blade guides, there's a roller bearing. Now this one's froze up. So we're going to take a look at that. But first, let's get this cleaned up a little bit more. Take our wire brush, clean it up. That way it slides on nice and easy when we come back. Now I got the other side off too. This one spins, but it's got a little groove right here. If you look right there, you'll see a groove right there. So we're going to replace that one too. This is the one that was froze up. It doesn't move at all anymore. Well, these are really tight and rusted on there pretty good. So I'm going to end up taking those back to the shop, and we'll work on it there. And then we'll bring them back out once we get them completed and cleaned up. Now that we're back at the shop, we can put them in the vise. Still took a little bit of persuasion, a little bit of penetrating oil, but they're starting to unscrew. Now you'll see on here, it's got a washer, a bearing, and another washer. And of course, this is stuck on there too. So we're going to take a socket, slightly bigger, a deep weld socket, and just tap on it. And that's going to pop it out as it was kind of pressed on or corroded on. So these are the replacement bearings I'm using. I bought them off of an online retailer. They're 6,000 2RS C3 bearings. I bought a 10-pack. I think it was like 10 or 15 bucks when I did it, knowing that this would have to be done eventually. So we'll use the socket to press this back on, same as we took it off, and screw it back in place in the reverse order that we took it off. But I did use a little thread seal on that because I noticed there was some thread seal when I took them off. Now the next step will be to clean up these blade guides. I tried a wire brush and it did an okay job, but I did have to throw them against the grinder just a little bit to get them to ride up and down smoothly so they could be adjusted easily. Now we'll go out to the field and get these installed and spaced out properly. For this, I'm just using a business card. You can use feeler gauges if you'd like and look up the specs in the book, but this will do you just fine out in the field. So what I do is I tear off a piece and I fold it in half. That gives me the double thickness of the business card, and I put that on both the top and the bottom of the blade and behind it, and I keep the same spacing throughout. You do want to make sure that you have the tension on your blade at that point that you would be running at. That way you don't have a sag in the blade as you're adjusting these blade guides, because then they would rub on the top blade guide and not be adjusted properly. So we get that spacing, and then we'll tighten everything up. Then we'll install the Zerk fitting back on once we have this all installed. After installing, I like to do a visual inspection, make sure my spacings are even, they give a little bit of clearance, nothing's rubbing, and I check both the top, bottom, and I try to look in the back. It was hard to get a good angle to look at that with the camera, but we have an equal spacing on the back side as well. So the only thing left to do was install the pull start assembly, and I'll put a link in the description of how I did that. And if you haven't yet, please click subscribe. Like it, share it with your friends. And if you have any great ideas you'd like me to share, let me know. Until next time, my friends, and thank you for watching.